Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into how Stranger Things Season 4, particularly Episode 1, pays homage to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition and old school gaming in general. So, as many of you may know, Stranger Things is a series on Netflix where a young group of kids are discovering that there is like another dimension, another world that runs counter to their own, kind of hidden from their own. And throughout the series, this is season 4, there have been various instances where there have been breaches between the two worlds, and creatures from the upside down, which is this other plane that is connected to their reality, their world. Every once in a while, there's a rift, there's a breach in the separation, and creatures from the upside down are making their way into the real world. So because this group of kids, and it's a mixed group of kids, so there's both boys and girls mixed into this group, although they don't all play Dungeons and Dragons. That is primarily the group of 4 or 5 boys. I'm just going to try to remember. Will, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and I think that's it right now. And they've made a few attempts to bring some other kids into their group, whether they're going to allow Max, a girl, to enter their group, in which case she, I think ultimately thinks it's a little bit too dorky, and I'll get into that. There was some question very, very early on in the season whether they would bring Elle into the group, 11 into the group, and that, of course, was rejected as well, for different reasons. She just never makes it into the group. It's probably not her thing. But then in season 4 here, they do have Erica, which is Lucas's younger sister. She does join the group, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So these creatures coming into their world, the boys are giving the names, or they're putting it into a Dungeons and Dragons context. So one of the first creatures that they encounter, they call Demogorgon. Even though it doesn't look like Demogorgon, it doesn't act like Demogorgon, it's really not a major demon lord, but it is the first thing that they encounter, and so they call it Demogorgon because they had no other name to apply to it. That's just the one that they chose. Later on in the later seasons, probably season 2 or 3, they encounter another creature, which they believe is the one that is the most, driving all of this going forward, and they name that creature the Mind Flayer. And so now in season 4, the new antagonist in the game they have called Vecna, all right, who is a leash that. Or lick, however you want to pronounce it. I've always said leash. It's an undead sorcerer, basically, and that's the context that they put this antagonist into, and so they reference Vecna all throughout season 4, even though the creature, the actual entity, is not missing a left eye and a left arm like Vecna from Dungeons and Dragons is purported to actually be like. but they do make the references, and they are talking about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition in their gameplay. And here I have a screenshot of this is Eddie Munson, and that's the character name, and he is the dungeon master of the group, the Hellfire group. And so, as you can see by the image, they're clearly playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. This series is this season is set in 1986. So, second edition is on the verge of being released. Depending on the time, I believe they're talking around September. So possibly a year after the article, which is brought up in the video, and I will bring that up as well in the series, dealing with the Satanic Panic. So they're talking about the environment surrounding the game in the mid 1980s. That was very much a real thing. That was something that many players' parents were reading these articles, and they were coming back. They were concerned, just like they were concerned about teenagers listening to heavy metal. They were concerned about teenagers playing Dungeons and Dragons, and this actually got into the perception of kids our age as well. I mean, some rejected the Satanic Panic, saying, no, it's just a game. It's not, this is all stupid. This is just our parents trying to undo our things. And but others actually bought into it, and they said, this is something that's potentially dangerous, or even if it's not that, it's something that I don't want to be a part of. I don't want to be associated with it, and not just because of that, but it was because Dungeons and Dragons was always really portrayed as the place for nerds and outcasts and just individuals that others in the cool crowd really didn't want to associate with. So there were, of course, a few people who crossed over into different cliques, especially from the junior high and high school age levels. People just didn't want to associate with the gamers or play this game at the time. And that is portrayed in episode 1 when two of the characters, Lucas and Mike, have to get a replacement for Dustin and Mike had to get a replacement for Lucas, because Lucas was not going to be able to make that particular game session. And so they went all around their high school asking individual students, and you saw across the various social groups. So they ask girls, they ask boys, they ask people of different ethnicities if they want to play the game, and they continuously getting told, no, 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 that's a game for nerds. No, that's a game about then they bring up the Satanic Panic. No, I don't want. They exhaust being able to find anybody in their high school, and so they have to resort to going to the middle school, where they actually find Lucas's sister Erica, who was younger than them. I believe she's like 11 or 12 years old, and she's willing to come into their game. And I'll talk about that group dynamic once we get to that point. So you kind of have what the writers do here is they accurately depict two things. They accurately depict the influence of the Satanic Panic on the game itself, and on the way that both teenagers and parents view or have a perception of playing this game. And the other thing that they, very accurately reflect is that the players of the game were open to having anyone willing to play to join their game. There was no exclusion based on, the race or the gender, even the age. I mean, when Erica comes to join the Hellfire group, the only thing the dungeon master is actually concerned about is if she knows what she's talking about, the game. And when he asks her, she says, I'm a level 14 half elf. Now she says rogue, and I'll get to that as well. But she says, I'm a level 14 half elf rogue, and I am capable of doing this, and using these abilities and using this very specific weapon. And that is, she mentions that she's chaotic good, and that she will kill her enemies, with this weapon. That she just knew what she was talking about, and he, of course, invites her to join the game just solely based on the fact that she, knew the game, she knew what she was talking about, and she was there to play. And that's the big thing, is that she was there to play the game. She wasn't coming in and saying, oh, well, you don't currently have a girl playing at your table, and so that should be part of your consideration. She understood that she had to prove that she was aware, and knowledgeable of the game itself. And she had no problem with doing that. So that's a really important message that the Duffer Brothers put out here, and I think it really addresses, if they do intend to have this apply to modern perceptions of old school Dungeons and Dragons. At least I hope that's why they included this here. I know that they're thinking of it based on their use of the term rogue instead of thief. And again, I will get to that in a moment. It's one of my slight criticisms for what they're doing here, but they do have an understanding that they wanted to portray the game community surrounding Dungeons and Dragons in the early to mid 1980s in a very accurate way, and they certainly do convey the fact that it was open, it was inclusive, it was open to anyone willing to come in and to play. Now, let's start talking about some of the the game imagery, the game mechanics that you see in this episode. So clearly they're playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. You have the original Dungeon Master's Guide there. They have the books. They are rolling modern dice. That was the one thing that I picked up on, was like, yeah, they didn't have dice like that, back in the 1986. So they are utilizing, modern dice, but they are rolling, and, they have their figures on the table and everything like that. They're not, they're not these huge, like Dwarven Forge complexes and everything like that. Thousands of dollars worth of miniatures and everything. They're using, pretty standard plastic and lead figure stand-ins for various creatures that they have. Their map is basically constructed out on the table in front of them. They do have a very nice setup, for what they have, but nothing was extremely over the top. It was something that would have been within the means of a group like this, especially one that's very dedicated to playing the game. So I mentioned it a few times. So Erica Sinclair is playing a half-elf 14th level rogue, and she says rogue. And that's one of the term rogue for thief was not used until later on. Possibly even, it might have been in second edition, possibly like later on in the Thieves book. I think it's more of a third edition, and certainly a fourth edition and beyond type of thing. So I would have been happier if she actually just called the class what it was. I mean, she could have said a thief acrobat if that's what her character was, or just simply a thief. So that's the one thing that I kind of not really cringed at it, but I was like, you know what? You didn't have to do that. She could have said she was playing a thief. And I don't think anybody would have really been like, oh, I have no idea what she's talking about. You got to know that she's playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. The other thing that I noticed while they were, rolling dice was at one point I believe that she rolled 2d8, and I'm trying to figure out when a thief would actually roll 2d8. The only time I was thinking of is if you're, wielding a bastard sword or something that's, 2 to 16 damage. But that wouldn't have been in her case, number one. But and then I noticed some other times that they seem to be rolling both a d20 and potentially their damage die along with it, which was another thing that I thought was probably done just because it looks much more dramatic if you're rolling more than a number of dice. I really love the excitement when and I won't go into more detail because I don't want to spoil it, but someone at the table rolls a natural 20, and it goes against the antagonist of the the boss antagonist of the game session that they're playing, and the DM, so Eddie Munson, shows both initially shock because it was only a 1 in 20 chance of that happening, obviously, and then elated, happy. And so it shows the and he says this is what playing the game is all about, and that I thought truly captured the concept of the non-adversarial dungeon master. When we were DMing back then, and for many of us that have been DMing for a very long time, there's a difference between being a confrontational dungeon master and being a dungeon master that that places challenges in front of the player characters. You're not an adversarial dungeon master if a player character dies. You're just playing the dice as they, the dice are the final arbiter. You're just rolling the dice like everyone else does, and what happens is what happens. So I was really glad to see that, because several of the party members had already died, at this point, and again, I don't want to give out too much, but it was a really, really important moment, I think, to demonstrate what the true allure of old school gaming is, and that is that it's you're on the edge of your seat. You don't know if you're going to make it out, with all of your characters intact, and and sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's total party wipes are never a fun thing, but in the overall experience, I think it's important for players to have at least gone through it once. It certainly shouldn't be something that happens, often, unless you're playing tournament games, and then, that's perfectly fine. I mean, many of Gary Gygax's modules were really tournament modules where you were supposed to play it once and then, play those characters once, and then it's all over with. So it didn't matter if no one actually survived at the end, because the session was going to end after 4 or 6 hours or so. And, when it was over, it was over. Whether you were successful or not, you were playing for the experience of playing at the table. And that's very much the feel that I got from watching this episode, and watching them play. They're playing the game to experience the game. Win, lose, or draw is what they were, what they had bought into. And so that's what was really exciting for me to watch this and to say, you know what, Stranger Things, the writers of Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers, they really do have a great grasp of old school role playing. They certainly are focusing on the Dungeons and Dragons of its day. So I know in the earlier seasons, in season one, which was set in 1983, the boys were playing Frank Metzner's basic box set, so the red box. And now in 1986, they're at high school now, and they're playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so there's that evolution not only of the characters and their stories as they're moving forward, but there's also an evolution of where they have moved on from playing basic Dungeons and Dragons, and they have elevated their game to playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So, once again, it's like if you're going to come into Stranger Things and you're saying, "Hey, this is a big boost for fifth edition," and so now everyone that is a fan of Stranger Things, they should be playing fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, and like a total disconnect of both the time period in which the show is depicting players of Dungeons and Dragons were actually in, and a total disconnect from the actual game that they were playing. So there are plenty of ways that you can play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. There are plenty of us that still run it. There are ways that you can go even through Wizards of the Coast and buy PDF versions of those games, since Wizards of the Coast does own it. So there's ways that you can get it. You can go on eBay and you can still get the hardcovers of AD&D First Edition, ranging anywhere from as low as $40, which is really a contemporary price for a hardcover book, and going as high as $80 or maybe even $100 for some of the much harder to find books that are out there. But you still only need 3 books in order to run the game. You need the Dungeon Master's Guide, you need the Player's Handbook, and you need the Monster Manual. And you can leave it at that. So for less than what the new packaged up booklets are going to cost from Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or whatever they're going to call it when it does release in that way, for less than that, you can get the 3 core books of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and you could really, engage in the actual game that these actors are portraying, that they're playing in. And I guarantee you will actually have you'll experience that same feel that we had when we were playing this game back in the 80s as well. The game does play that much differently than modern games. The mechanics may be very familiar with you, but just the essence of it and the feel of it is going to, I think it's going to wake you up and see how good Advanced Dungeons and Dragons really was at, at developing that feel for, just a heroic fantasy role-playing game. It literally does have those elements that are cooked into the mechanics, but behind the scenes, they're cooked into the way that the players actually play it. And that's the one last potential spoiler that I'm going to give. At one point, these players huddle up and they decide, we're going for broke here. We're damned to torpedoes. Fight to the death. and they chant fight to the death, fight to the death. They're going to go forward because it's a heroic fantasy. All right. And you cannot be heroic if there isn't the risk of failure. And that's the last bit that I want to leave you with, that Stranger Things Season 4, Episode 1 really does hammer home. And that's the true essence of what it was like to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the mid-'80s. And as, but prior to second edition coming out. And so, hey, I just encourage you to watch the series, and if you have the opportunity to play an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition game, certainly jump on that opportunity. At least experience for yourself what it's like to play in an OSR setting and an OSR system, I should say. And if you can actually get them, on eBay for, or even Amazon sometimes, for a reasonable price, like $60 or less per those 3 books, which I certainly think that you can, then I would tell you to, if you can afford it, jump on it, because it is really around the same price range that modern games are currently selling for anyway. So, yeah, I would definitely jump on that if you can, especially in that lower portion of the price range, of spending for the 3 books anywhere is certainly less than $180. You're right in that same category of modern games as it is anyway. So, once again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. I will not be returning to do anything else talking about Stranger Things. I just wanted to get out in front of, some of the arguments that this is this is potentially a big boost for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I think that it's potentially a bigger boost for the players that are currently out there, or the potential players that want to see what this hobby is all about. If you're going to experience this hobby for the first time, then, the old school games, especially like, on D&D BX, the basic and expert sets, or if you want to jump right into the deep end of the pool, go right for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and I think that you will certainly enjoy it as much as many of us have been enjoying these same game systems for 40, nearly 50 years. So again, thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You'll have a great rest of the afternoon. Take care.